OIS Podcast audience. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you again. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rothman. I am a practicing ophthalmologist. I am a glaucoma specialist by training, currently involved in the management of patients in a clinical practice in New York. I spend about half of my time doing that. The other half of my time I spend running InFocus Capital Partners, which is an ophthalmically focused venture capital fund. We have a first fund that has fully deployed its capital and are actively involved in raising capital for Fund 2. I have had the pleasure of speaking with many corporate CEOs over the course of my time as a co-manager of a venture capital fund, both here in the United States and during times spent in Israel. And we have the unique pleasure today of speaking with Almog Aley-Raz, who is the CEO and VP of Research and Development for CorNeat Vision. And CorNeat is an interesting company that we've been watching for some time, that has some unique solutions for problems with today's ocular implants. So, without much further hubbub, I will introduce Almog. Thank you for being here on our podcast.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here today. I think, one of the things that I kind of like to do before we get into your company and into the technology is talk a little bit about you. I think people should know how you got to where you are today, where you came from, what your background is educationally and both work-wise, because I think there's a uniform thread that comes up through the ophthalmology innovation landscape that's somewhat unique. I know people are kind of born into and bred into the ophthalmology world and how they stay there and how that grows into a very collegial environment for both of us. So just give us a little background. How'd you get started? Where'd you grow up? What'd you study? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Israel until age 14, after which my parents moved to the United States. So I actually went to high school in Westport, Connecticut. Graduated at age 16. Spent a year or so in college and then went back to Israel to continue my studies as an electrical engineer. And like every other Israelis, I went to the service and spent 8 years in the Israeli Air Force as an engineer, managing avionics and also being involved in a multi-million-dollar air defense system project, after which it was too dull to remain in the Air Force. So, this was the dot-com era, and I stepped out of service and basically involved in a startup that was spun off from a large Israeli high-tech company called Converse. Basically eventually became the CEO of that company. So taking it and managing it for about a decade until it was sold to Nuance Communications, a very well-known corporate America company. Stayed there for 6 years, grew a $100 million business, and then met Gilad Litvin, who's a close friend of mine, and switched to ophthalmology. Gilad and I live in the same village. We have kids at the same age. We do mountain biking together. And CorNeat Vision was actually seeded in a downhill mountain biking vacation in Andorra following the ESCRS in Barcelona in 2015. If I look back, every 10 years I switched career. All of the positions I managed were very multidisciplinary in nature. And I really like what I do now at CorNeat Vision. And it brings together so many things that are required in order to succeed in this challenging market.
Okay, so let's go back for a second. The two of you are riding down some mountain, wearing your helmets, pedaling through the woods or whatever, and then one of you says, "Hey, let's start a company that solves the ocular implant, problems that we saw during." How does that? There's that's crazy. That's a great story about how things happen. But, what was the impetus? What was the motivation for that? What did you hear at ESCRS and why were you at ESCRS? And what was it that made you realize that this was a space that needed to be addressed?
So at that time, I was working for Nuance Communications, and I was in Spain at the same time selling voice biometric systems to Santander. And it was just coincident that we were both in Spain. And one of the friends that does ride with us offered, hey, let's stay after the event for 3 days. And, mountain biking is you with your bike, right? You only have, I don't know, half an hour before and after to drink coffee, to chat, drink a beer every now and there. We never spent so much time together. And then during the 3 days, we had the time to actually talk about our careers, our aspirations, our dreams. And as I was, telling my story, Gilad shared with me his idea to develop this revolutionary artificial cornea. And I told him, look, if you need any help, let me know. And that call came like a month later, along with a presentation, which was a physician's presentation. And as I read it, it was very peculiar because there's such a challenge out there, and nobody is actually chasing and try to really solve that. And I'm not talking about the artificial cornea as a secondary line of treatment. I'm talking about artificial cornea as something that actually solves the global challenge of corneal blindness.
Right. And I think, just to dive in a little bit deeper, and, I don't, I know you've done your homework, so you get it, but corneal blindness in the United States is kind of a rare thing, right? I mean, corneal tissue is probably the most transplanted tissue in the United States. Procedures are performed routinely. I think as we've probably reduced the number of full thickness corneal transplants that have occurred over time into more, deep stromal or endothelial transplants exclusively, you still need donor tissue. And although there are companies out there that are trying to figure out how to preserve, a patient's own endothelium, we know that ultimately you're still going to need to have that repaired. Outside of the United States and outside of, Europe, corneal blindness is probably the leading cause of blindness, right? So, and everybody thinks about macular degeneration and glaucoma and whatnot, but outside the United States, corneal blindness is a huge problem because there's not a donor system in place that exists in more modernized places in the world, and also because there's not enough skilled people to actually transplant corneas. And you solve one of those problems directly, which hopefully I think leads to solving the other problem, which is the lack of available personnel. But so was there a personal connection to that? Did somebody have a problem with a corneal transplant? Somebody need a corneal transplant? What was the motivation for you guys to really think that this needed to be solved?
So, Gilad, is actually a retinal fellow expert. And, he actually wrote the patent for the glaucoma device before he wrote the one for the artificial cornea. We'll speak about this a bit later. But, he's one of these physicians that always kept like a 1 day for innovation. And basically, yes, the idea was to solve the global problem, not necessarily the challenge in the US. And, but the way I look at it is very different. I look at the standard of care. And if you go into the data, what you realize is that the success rate, the anatomical success rate, meaning the cornea remaining transparent, is somewhere at a range of 85%, I think, 2 years post-op. And that really depends on the physicians, the tissue, the indication. And there are some indications that are not good or are suitable for that. So you can say, well, it's a decent success rate. But if you look deeper, about 50% of the patient would suffer from 4 to 5 diopters of astigmatism with this surgery. At the end of the day, I believe that people want to see well. And this is not a good solution. If your glasses would have been 4 or 5 diopters of astigmatism, you would throw them out, right?
Yeah.
So yes, you turn them from maybe blind to ambulatory, but many do suffer from low vision. And if you look at the data from Europe, for example, about 20 to 30% of transplantations today are of repeated graft. It's actually the highest, right? The leading indication for transplantation is a failed graft. So,
Right.
If this was a knee transplant or implant, and I would say, hey, within 2 years, you will need to do this again in 20% of the times, and 50% will limp. That's how I view standard of care in the United States for keratoplasty. So there is a lot to do there.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that people who aren't familiar with the corneal transplant market, I mean, I'm a glaucoma specialist, so I don't do corneal transplantation, but I'm certainly around corneal transplants. And I think glaucoma tube shunts are probably one of the leading causes of having to have a corneal transplant, right? We're probably responsible for more corneal failure with some of the glaucoma things that we do. But ultimately, you're right. I mean, the postoperative astigmatism management is probably where corneal specialists spend the majority of their chair time, with patients. And you're right, long-term success is very variable. And there are loads of people out there who've had 4, 5, 6 corneal transplants over the course of 20 years because, they're just not maintaining. And again, although the supply of transplantable corneal tissue is, kind of not exhaustible at the moment, it is still donor tissue with all the associated, sort of stigma of having donor tissue in terms of rejection and immunogenicity and all the other things that come into play there. So I would agree with you. While we're still able to relatively do corneal transplants relatively easy here, the outcomes probably aren't nearly what people think they want them to be here in the United States.
Yes, globally speaking, there's one available cornea for 70 million. So we're looking at about 2 million cases of corneal blindness around the world, and about 150 to 200,000 transplantations. So and if you think about it, some of them are of repeated grafts. So the global challenge is really huge.
Okay, so talk to me about CorNeat's technology and Evermatrix and all that stuff. I mean, I'm familiar with it, so I get it. But why don't you talk about what the fundamental problem is and how your technology kind of addresses that?
So the challenge with artificial cornea is how to take a lens, right, a synthetic lens, and permanently integrate it with the eye. There have been, attempts to do that in the past with the Boston KERO. Osteodontic is another solution but all the current solutions rely on donor tissue for that integration. And basically, our approach was to leverage a unique material technology to permanently integrate a wide aperture synthetic lens with the ocular tissue. And we're doing that by surrounding that skirt with a unique porous skirt that is implanted under the conjunctiva. That's an area where there's a lot of vascularization and, the tenon capsule. And what we've proven in our first human study is that this is indeed a viable mechanism. We've just started our second clinical trial just a month and a half ago with a first implantation in Paris. But once the lens is in the eye, you have like optimal vision. We humans know how to make lens. And the fact that we integrate on the conjunctiva enable us to offer a lens that is 1 centimeter in diameter with an optical element of about 6 to 7 millimeter that provides, vision, and enables patients to fully enjoy their vision potential.
Right. I think a lot of people who are listening to this are maybe a little confused just because you're talking about cornea, but you're using the concept of lens. I think that most people who don't know ophthalmology well don't understand that the cornea is actually the most refractive surface in the eye, right? Everybody thinks the lens does all the focusing of light that comes into your eye. So if you think of the light as a camera, if you think of the eye as a camera, light comes in, it hits the lens of the camera, and then maybe there's a bunch of smaller lenses behind that fine tune it, and eventually it gets onto the film. In the eye, it's the cornea doing the majority of that focusing. The lens is designed to fine tune it to get it onto the retina. So you have to have a focusing, the cornea has to have focusing power in order for it to be a useful tissue. And the ability to make a synthetic cornea with a lens-like focusing component is actually the critical piece of technology here. The integration is part of it as well, but you have to have that cornea, artificial cornea, also be able to focus the light. It can't just be a transparent, optically clear piece of material. It has to have power.
Yeah, and while the lens within the eye actually sits in a capsule, so you can just display it with something synthetic, the cornea sits within the human body in the outside, and that's an area that is prone to, infections and anything that can come from the outside. So the reliability of that integration must be is critical to the successful long-term retention of the lens.
Right. So you have a lens, and then it's attached to a material, which is your Avatrix material, correct? And that
Right.
Avatrix material is what's unique here, correct? So what is the technology there? Why does it work? Why does it integrate so well? And what's unique about it?
Yeah. So everything that is implanted within the human body, excluding the intraocular area, maybe the brain, which are immune privileged sites, trigger a foreign body response that ends up in one of three options, right? The material either degrades, or if it stays within the tissue, it gets encapsulated. The third option is that the body was successfully expelling that material outside. So everything that stays for good eventually gets encapsulated, which means that it doesn't really integrate with its surrounding. The Avatrix material is a unique material as it is non-degradable and tissue integrating. The way we do it is by mimicking the structure of the extracellular matrix, the skeleton of the tissue, in a way that kind of fools the immune system to think that this is a real thing. And what we are observing over time is that once this is implanted, it triggers a progressive cellular infiltration that eventually completely ends up with a colonized matrix. So this is not a scaffold, it's not temporary, it's more like the metal mesh within a concrete wall once integrated, and it can be used to biomechanically attach things to living tissue. It can be used to possibly conceal synthetic material from the surrounding tissue. It can be used to reinforce tissue. And there are many other applications in ophthalmology and outside ophthalmology that can leverage this biomaterial.
Right. I think people who don't do surgery probably don't understand what happens with foreign bodies. Like, if ever everybody here who's listening to this probably has had a splinter before, right? And a splinter gets into your skin, and your body's gonna either pull it out, push it out eventually, or it's gonna form a wall around it and make a cyst. And that's kind of what encapsulation is. It's a problem because you're right. Without integration, things can move. Things have mobility that can lead to erosion, meaning to ultimately get expelled. Really, to get something integrated that's foreign is not so easy. Metal, there's no metal that we know of that will integrate into the human body. And that's why artificial joints have to be, concrete and screwed and hammered and whatever else barbaric crud that orthopedics do to get it to stay in place. And, it's hard to get things to do that. So this is a promoter of actual tissue integration, where this becomes intimate and integrated within the tissue of the eye, and therefore it adds permanency to one of its characteristics. And that's kind of what you want when it comes to implantable tissues on the surface of the body.
Correct. And the material is flexible, and it's really durable. So, in the context of try to, connect something to the eye wall, it was optimal for us. And basically, every surgeon that I meet, regardless of whether he's a gynecologist, plastic surgeon, orthopedics, periodontal surgeon, maxillofacial reconstruction, everyone that is exposed to our results immediately comes with, between 2 to 20 different ideas of how this can be leveraged. If you think about it, our artificial cornea is actually an interface between the outside world and the inside. And there are many applications to that: mechanical, electrical, physical.
Yeah, and just a barrier, creation. I mean, even barrier creation, right? So, okay, so tell me, where is the CorNeat, keratoprosthesis in the world right now? Is it available? Is it being trialed? I mean, where are you at in terms of its development?
Yeah, so we've completed the first human study about 1.5 years ago, and we've learned a lot. Mostly, we've learned a lot about the surgical procedure, which is novel in itself, and it's much simpler and straightforward versus keratoplasty, where you need to suture a flexible tissue to another. And as we've done these first 10 cases, we've optimized the surgical procedure, tweaked the pre-op, post-op treatment, and so forth. And we've just started a second clinical trial toward 510K clearance. So this will be in the market within a couple of years. Our first patient was operated about a month and a half ago in Paris. This guy hadn't seen since 2004, and he's 20/30 now. 1.5 months post-op, and vision rehabilitation was immediate. There is no complaint on pain or discomfort. And it's an amazing story. This guy hadn't seen his 18-year-old daughter or son ever. Imagine the first iPhone he saw was 15.
Unbelievable. And then what other products do you have? So you have other products that are going to be utilizing the same technology. Where are those at? What are they for?
Yeah, so other KOLs were exposed to our preclinical study, and specifically I'm speaking about Professor David Rothman out of Toronto. And Professor Rothman does a lot of keratoplasties, but he's also doing secondary tube erosion and other complex ocular surface surgeries. And he came and asked, "Hey, can I get a little piece of that skirt for my glaucoma surgeries?" I think it might be for scleral reinforcement, for trauma, for covering suture knots. This can be optimal, and for us, that was actually a way to get a product to the market earlier and de-risk actually all of the things that we do: clinical studies, regulatory, reimbursement, initial market launch. It basically allows us to practice at an area which has a lower risk, make mistakes, right? Learn from them, and be ready with everything as our two flagship products reach the market, which is in about a couple of years.
So as a patching technology, being able to cover things with tissue that integrates, just in my own world, revising previous filtering surgeries, like covering holes in the eye, things like that. Incredible applications. Right now, we just put something over there that we hope, kind of sits in place, tissue patch grafts and things like that. Again, requiring donors, right? Scleral patch grafts, pericardial patch grafts, corneal patch grafts, other tissue still requires donor material and ultimately degrades over time. So utilization there. What about you have a glaucoma product? What about that?
So just to conclude on the Everpatch, it was launched to the US market about 2 quarters ago with provision over 500 devices to the market, and basically are receiving very positive feedbacks. There are a few cases of early exposures. This material needs to be static for some time, and it's non-degradable, so we don't expect any late exposures. So we're working with some of the centers to learn when it happens. But so far, it looks really, really well. There are a lot of repeated orders and then positive feedback from the market.
Great. And the glaucoma device, because you have a glaucoma device too.
Yes. So the glaucoma device that we have is named the eShunt, or CorNeat eShunt. And it's basically an attempt to extend minimally invasive surgery to severe and refractory glaucoma patients. This segment hadn't seen innovation in years. We have the Ahmed, the Bearmel, and the Paul charts, and a couple of others, but all of these are relatively aggressive in terms of the surgical procedure, and they clog at a rate of 20% a year, eventually necessitating another implantations and drops and all that. So what we aim is to develop a solution that will try and hit that 10x3 target, which is 10-minute surgery, 10-year patency, and 10 millimeter of mercury, right?
Right.
That's the goal. That's the holy grail of that.
Yes, it is.
And I think we're getting there. Maybe not to all of the aspects, but we were able to implant our shunt in under 20 minutes. And we believe that its design will enable lowering the intraocular pressure significantly and not clog over time. And in order to do so, first of all, this one comes with an integrated Everpatch, so you don't need to cover it or conceal it. It's ab externo, like the Ahmed. It has a tube resistance that minimize the risk of hypotony in the short term, and it also have our special material attached to its outlet in order to minimize the encapsulation that eventually clog all the other device. One other unique element about our device is that it drains intracorneally or retrobulbar in the deep in the orbit in an area that has fat and is less fibrotic activity.
Right. So the more posterior you can drain, the better. Barbell implants, Almog implants, they all stay, just about the insertion of the muscles on the eye, and this goes much deeper back. Your tube is longer. So for anybody who knows what's going on in glaucoma surgical management, there's a device currently going through an FDA process called the InFocus microshunt, and yours is basically the same concept. Small insertion, covering plate, but a much longer tube which drains posteriorly, which should result in longer survival and less encapsulation. So that's great. Yeah, where is that? Where are we going to be able to start seeing that in testing?
So we've done a few implantations in glaucomatous dogs, and a few compassionate implantation in blind painful eyes in humans. Got initial feedback. We're doing like a final minor tweak to the outlet design, after which we'll start a clinical trial. So toward the end of the year,
Great.
we will be with everything, biocompatibility and all that.
Good. Sign me up.
Welcome to our best.
Yeah, well, we're working on that too. In the last minute or so, just let me know. So what's the first application outside of the eye? Like, where are you going to go? This has, potential so many other places in the body to have tissue, to have an implant that fully integrates like this is so unique. And there's so much, broad utilization potential for this. But where's your, first low-hanging fruit target outside the eye?
Yeah, so we have a project which is actually funded by the U.S. Navy to evaluate the use of our Avatrix material in maxillofacial reconstruction surgery. So the idea is to help them rebuild the smiles of injured soldiers, these types of challenges. We wrote the first patent outside of ophthalmology in 2019, and this was for gingival recession. This is a very common problem. And the solutions for lifting the gum line up are not working very well because everything is degradable. So we think we have that infrastructure that will help keep that up. So we wrote it and shelved it because we were focused on our ophthalmic products. And then we bumped upon this grant opportunity and outshelved it. And basically, this grant actually funds the use of our device as a patch, as a membrane for guided bone and tissue regeneration. We have proven already that we integrate not just with soft tissue, as osteoblasts penetrate this matrix, but also with bone tissue. So that's one application. The second application is the coating of titanium implants, not the regular vertical ones. I mean, there are a lot of solutions out there, but we're talking about these implants that are used to connect fractured bones. Right. Have these poles that sink outside of your gums for your crowns. These solutions are riddled with complications and infections because of that interface that does not exist between the synthetic, whether it's titanium or another material, and the living tissue around it. If we can seal that area and protect that implant, this can be a great solution, not just for an injured soldier or people after a car accident, but also for standard, smile regeneration, I would call it.
Well, listen, Almog, I mean, we're about to run out of time, but I want to tell you that, I think it's easy to underestimate what you've developed here, but having fully integrated, artificial material is actually a big deal. And it's great to see that you've, obviously selected the eye as the first place to work on this, where it's so necessary to solve some of our challenges, but I think there'll be a lot of utilization for, this technology outside the eye. And I look forward to seeing you guys continue to broaden your portfolio. Having core technology that, is multi-vertical and multi-indication is kind of a great target for investment. And I think you guys are going to do great. With that, I want to thank you, Almog Aley-Raz, for sharing your time today. We look forward to seeing more from CorNeat Vision.
Thank you.